welcome back to Through Thick and Thin's discussions about disordered eating with Rachel the therapist. And I'm very excited for today's episode because not only is this our first video recording, shout out to who will be joining us today, and also my brother-in-law, Joey, who helped us out with the technological stuff. But we will have an interviewee, which is our first male interviewee. So I'm excited to hear some perspective on that. Ryan Pelikan. And this one is obviously a little personal to me because Ryan is my fiance and life partner. So it should be interesting to see how the conversation goes because we normally don't filter ourselves with each other. But Ryan and I met working as counselors together. So Ryan also has a background in mental health and is pursuing his master's in social work. He also has a personal experience with disordered eating. So we're going to be talking about that and kind of seeing his perspective, not only from his point of view, but also as a partner of me and someone who was going through recovering with their body and food and things like that. So it should be an exciting episode.
It should.
So let's start with, what is your history around disordered eating?
Well, I would say that I never had a healthy relationship with food. Even from early on, it was always like, well, if I eat this, what does the rest of my day look like? But it wasn't until I was around 3 years sober when the unhealthy habits really became like a thing. And I started realizing oh shoot, this is not normal.
Do you think that's correlated to your sobriety?
I think it's one of those things where when you take out one major presenting problem, you start seeing underlying problems underneath of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just for, any listeners or viewers, just to add, Ryan's in recovery from any mind and mood altering substances
For about 6.5 years.
Yes. So when we talk about recovery, we're going to also be talking about alcohol and substance use as well as food and disordered eating. Just to kind of do that. So you feel like not really having the maladaptive behaviors or that shield of the substance use, do you think that affected your relationship with food in your body, or do you think it was always there?
I think it was always there.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the substances I use, right? A lot of stimulants, a lot of uppers, a lot of things that would make me not hungry. Right. So even within the substance use, it was still directly related to not wanting to eat, not having that caloric intake.
And you said that's always been an issue with you. When would you say, you said it got, more severe 3 years into your sobriety and recovery, but when would you say it first started throughout your childhood or when you were an adolescent?
I would probably say maybe early teens, maybe 12, 13 years old. When it became time when, all the guys were getting muscular and athletics and we're going into high school in 8th grade, and it's really our time to enter society and develop our personality. And am I going to get that kind of ideal body that society is telling me I should have?
Which was what for you?
For men, it's that muscular, have that 6-pack, have the defined muscles, tall, thin, stuff like that.
Do you think
I'm sorry, I was just thinking of what was that store where they had the half naked models in the mall? Was that Abercrombie and Fitch where they had the
the guys that was it was probably Hollister and Abercrombie. Yeah, so that was more probably bigger when we were teenagers, preteens. That was really big when they actually have the models standing there.
Yeah, in the mall. Yeah.
Or shirtless. And I mean that's a whole another thing with Hollister and Abercrombie and gift sizes and that whole thing. But do you think being with these groups of boys and men, like through athletics and through gym culture and working out in school, do you think that influenced you specifically, like almost like peer pressure? Or was it more of a larger societal issue?
It wasn't peer pressure because no guy was like talking about it. Really,
Like their insecurities about their body.
yeah, really, guys aren't saying like, "Oh, I can't eat this," or like, "I need to eat this to
Mhm.
bulk," or I need to cut." It was more of like this unspoken thing within like being a guy, where it's like you need to like get fit or like you need to be strong and muscular. And like if you look at all like the jobs that a lot of men have, it's all like those the rugged,
Sure.
yeah.
Or like stereotypically,
Hmm.
right? I know your experiences working as a counselor,
Hmm.
you're one of the few like male clinicians I feel like in most of your workplace and your schooling,
Hmm.
right? But coming back to the diet culture talk, I think that's interesting because like my experience as a woman is completely opposite. Like women constantly talk about diets and what we should be eating versus what we shouldn't be eating and like making comments about how like, oh, I'm being bad if I eat this. And it's almost like you're outcasted if you don't talk about that stuff. So I just find that interesting that men, it's like an unspoken thing, but women, it's like so outwardly spoken.
Yeah, it's actually almost sometimes the opposite, right? Because you'll hear a lot of guys say like, "Oh, dude, you need to eat like a cheeseburger," or like, "Oh, like why are you not eating that?" So it's like this unspoken thing, but yet so many men experience like body dysmorphia
Mhm.
and disorders. But like we have to like well, we don't have to, but a lot of the times we're outwardly like projecting the opposite. Whereas like the females are like,
Sure.
"Oh, you shouldn't be eating that," and the guys are kind of like, "You should be eating that, even though we don't mean it."
Projecting the opposite is in like, why aren't you eating these things? Like kind of giving you shit if you're not eating the cheeseburger
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
whatever it may be. Um, so I mean that kind of leads into my next question of like how do you believe your experience with disordered eating is different as a man than it would be if you
I mean, I was so shameful of like admitting that I had an eating disorder. Like I remember I was like not doing well at all, and it was affecting my job. And I walked into my clinical director's office, and I was like, "Hey, like I'm not doing really well," and I kind of like told her what was going on, and I was like, "But I shouldn't be having this because like I'm a guy."
mm,
And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Guys shouldn't be like having this." And she's like, "Says who?" And Holly like talked me through that,
yeah
but it still took me a long time to realize that men can have eating disorders.
yeah where I mean and this kind of goes back to where when I was talking to Sarah last episode and our experiences with purging and how almost every girl, I'll say, or woman I know, like when we talk about this, they've made themselves throw up at one time or another, and like that's almost socially acceptable. But it it isn't something I've heard like many men talk about, and I'm curious as to like why. I mean, obviously it's like that the societal issues behind that of like why that is not only shameful, but there's also like this feminine layer onto that. Like if you
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I was so secretive, and you hear that a lot, even with females, right? Like when I make myself purge, I try to keep that like my little
Yeah.
dirty secret.
Mm,
And it's interesting because now that I'm like I openly talk about it,
yeah.
I don't like have that shame, so I openly talk about it. And when I openly talk about it, a lot of men will like admit to also doing that.
Mhm.
And more times than not, like guys are admitting to doing it than not doing it.
Yeah.
So it's much more an issue than I even think it is. But it's it's just a weird like situation where once you start talking about it, other people start talking about it, but it's that like elephant.
Yeah. And I think that's my experience with disordered eating and eating disorders in general. Like every time I've brought the topic into the conversation, at least one person in a group or whatever the setting is has responded with understanding in some way and also having a disordered relationship with food in their body.
Yeah.
But it's like nobody wants to be the first one to talk.
Yeah, and I agree. And I do think a big reason why the men struggle is because there certainly is like a feminine label on not just like purging, but I think eating disorders in general.
Yeah, and I know like we've kind of talked about how there is less resources and access to treatment. Like a lot of facilities I even know locally will only take women or individuals who identify as women, and even that it's not fully accepted. And then, it's like you said, getting past that shame, and then like, where am I going? Who am I seeing? Who am I talking to about this?
Yeah, it's even when I went to my I was in therapy and I went to my therapist and we were talking about it and she referred me to like Overeaters Anonymous.
Yeah.
Right. And like I went to a meeting and they like outcasted me as soon as I went there because one, I was like a guy and I wasn't overweight.
Yeah.
So like I walked into a room of women
Yeah.
and was outcasted
Yeah.
before so you have this person who's like dying who
Yeah.
needs help and just like
Yeah.
nah.
And I mean, I'm curious if she referred you to Overeaters Anonymous because of your experience. Okay.
Mm.
And also, I personally didn't really love OA either because I feel like it is geared towards people who have like binge eating disorders.
Mhm.
But I can only imagine feeling even more ostracized of walking into a room full of women and, them judging you off the bat
Mhm.
when you're there, like being vulnerable, trying to get help.
Yeah, where it's like, yeah, I'm struggling with like because I was purging a lot at the time,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, I'm here because I binge and then I purge,
Yeah.
and they were like, yeah, we don't really know what to like tell you. They were like, here's a pamphlet.
Yeah, it's OA is like very interesting with that. Which I mean that's like, something for a whole other
Podcast. Mhm.
episode, yeah. Um, what advice do you think you would give a boy or a man who is currently struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder and is looking to start healing their relationship with food in their body?
Uh, Therapy, right? It's the quick like go-to answer, but I think there's a lot that goes under just like the umbrella term of therapy, right? Like I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of like self-worth that needs to happen, a lot of self-affirmations. Like I remember someone told me he's like you need to get completely naked and go in a mirror in front of a mirror
Yeah.
and like tell yourself that you love yourself every day until like you're able to do it.
Yeah.
And like I felt like I was too far gone for that, when in reality I wasn't. But if a young like guy and even a young woman like if they're given those simple things and it's talked about at an early age
Yeah.
they can kind of develop a higher sense of self.
And I think too, I mean, you know, this is like a soapbox for me and we talk about this a lot, but like finding a clinician who specializes in working with disordered eating and eating disorders. And I think that's also hard too, because even though that's somewhat of my niche and where I go, even though I'm not a man, like, and I can't relate to every client's experiences, like, once again, there's not many male clinicians who could specialize in working with eating disorders. So it is hard sometimes for men to like reach out for help and find somebody they truly feel like will understand.
Yeah, and like I told you I was doing research prior to coming on, just
Yeah.
like just to get some numbers for
So
you.
fact check me.
And like all the data I was pulling, like all the research articles I was pulling, like constantly said that men are so underdiagnosed
Hmm.
because even like clinicians who are aware of disordered eating disorders don't even properly assess males, and how all like the assessment tools are geared towards women and anorexia versus like even women in bulimia or
Yeah.
men with bulimia and stuff like that.
And I think since within like the DSM, like, the other specified eating disorders has just recently come out, it kind of gives more leeway
Mhm.
for diagnoses and for treatment options. But I don't think a lot of people are diagnosed with that as a primary mental health disorder. I think if anything, it's just something people like slap on there like later on.
Yeah, on top of something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, we talk about how it's coping for other things, but still, like,
Mhm.
so. Um, Before we kind of switch gears into more talking about your education and your experiences as like the partnership, is there anything else you want to touch on regarding men and eating disorders that you haven't had a chance to say?
Yeah, I think it's funny because it's not just eating disorders, like it leads to like the behavioral issues too, right? Like the over exercising.
Yeah.
Um and it's kind of like because we were talking about my sobriety and we were talking about my eating disorder, and I was thinking about this earlier of how much easier it is to like stay sober than it is to like be in recovery for an eating disorder. Right? Because like, all right, I can't do drugs, I can't drink.
Yeah.
If you think about other addictions, right, like just don't gamble, don't overspend. Those are like very simple, like
You
I
can't
just need,
abstain.
yeah, I can
Yeah.
I can be abstinent, right? But like, and like we go out, like we can go out dancing and there's
Mhm.
alcohol and like I'm not phased by it. But you put me in like a random room with like my favorite sweets and I become immediately like obsessive,
Yeah.
right? So it's one of those things where it's like you have to be around it and like you have to eat, which I think makes it a lot more difficult. And even like I was telling you the other day, I was on Instagram and the dude said to another dude like on a live feed, like, "Oh, bro, you're looking kind of small."
Oh,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
And it's like that kind of stuff where it's like so many men experience this and no guy like likes to hear that stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, again, it goes back to that like societal
Yeah, it's
thing.
just, placed under like ball busting between men as if a woman said that another woman looks fat to her face, like
Mhm.
you would be like canceled.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is, I mean, and I think women are more about like the passive aggressive comments, unfortunately. But yeah, I think that like teasing mentality of, and then if you say something, you're like too sensitive, and
Hmm.
like men don't really talk about feelings with each other, or you're kind of categorized as being a pussy, or whatever
Yeah.
it is, like you're automatically shamed again.
Hmm.
So this is just something, you push down, and it is what it is.
Yeah, and there's been times like guys have said stuff to me, and I'll go up to them and like, like that's not cool, right? And like they seem to be accepting of that,
Yeah.
but that doesn't happen all the time.
Sure.
Plus, I have the ability to like practice the assertiveness
Yeah.
versus a lot of people who aren't.
Yeah. That confrontation is really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Hmm.
um Coming back to what you were saying about abstaining from food. And I think this is what comes up a lot in my sessions with clients, because I do have clients I see that are in recovery from alcohol and substances. And now the disordered eating and eating disorders are like even more severe.
Hmm.
But this is where I think OA works for people, and it's also lacking with other people, because if you truly don't have a food addiction, because when you go to OA, they with sweets, you just have to cut out all sugar.
Yeah.
And then it's like if you ever struggled with restriction in your life, for me, that was extremely triggering because you want me to go back to this strict meal plan. And then if I stray from it, because inevitably I'm probably going to and binge, then I'm shamed again. Right. And it's just
Right.
this internal spiral, which I mean leads to the restriction binge cycles of like dieting versus, I mean, you obviously know that I practice or I try to be more involved in intuitive eating. And if we can control like the portions and actually listen to our intuition and our hunger and fullness cues, then we may be able to have a healthier relationship with food versus cutting it out completely. But not everybody can do that.
Yeah, and I think that's where also when you look at sobriety and abstinence based like programs, I think that's why they have like not just AA and NA, they have like the smart recovery,
Yeah.
age recovery. Like there's not one size fits all, but it certainly is like wherever you feel like you belong and where your recovery can like be most successful in. Like you do intuitive eating, I track macros,
Yeah.
right? And for me, it's kind of I kind of look at recovery and eating disorders as kind of like a harm reduction model of like how can I continue to like live my life eating and like still be somewhat happy.
Mhm. So shifting into our relationship and partnership, I started, I talked about with Sarah, like I started going to group therapy, I started doing intuitive eating groups and really shifting gears with my relationship with food and exercise. How did that affect you think?
Well, as a partner, like when you started doing intuitive eating, like I wanted to support you, right? And I did the intuitive eating with you for the first few months. I was like, look, I'll buy in. Well, I didn't do the intuitive eating.
Mm-mm.
I didn't track macros and ate what I wanted for the first 2 months
Yeah, I mean,
to support you. And then
yeah,
it really it just didn't work for me
yeah,
because I wasn't doing
yeah.
I wasn't doing intuitive eating. I was just
You were kind of
I was not
taking,
tracking.
yeah, you
Yeah.
were taking the bits and pieces of the things I was learning that you liked, which isn't bad, but it's also, yeah, like not intuitive eating
I was like, well, I crave ice cream, eating ice cream.
right? And that's the
Yeah.
misconception about intuitive eating, where, which I mean, that's a whole other thing too. But I think, which was super helpful for me at that period of time because I don't think I could have handled you continuing to track macros with me that early into it.
Because we were both tracking macros
Yeah,
until you went into that group.
pretty much. And I think you continued for a little bit and then you transitioned out, which I don't know was fully for me thing or for you thing or for us thing. Either way, I appreciate because I had so much shame and guilt and just feeling like lack of control. I mean, the macros were my safety net for a really long time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's where, when I was doing step work and like my sponsor told me that doing the intuitive eating is a good way of like letting go of that control because I was just like most people who are scared of doing intuitive eating. I was so scared of gaining the weight and like getting fat. And I think it at times it's almost hard because I know you struggle with these things too, but I also compare myself to you in your relationship and you're like annoyingly fit and in shape. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's continuing to do these things. I'm going to get fat. And it's like my insecurities now about like abandonment and all these other things, which are so much greater than just food and the body.
Yeah. I'm smiling because it's interesting because over the past few months I've been thinking like, damn, like she's able to like not track macros and she still looks super fit and like she has abs, but like I'm tracking macros. Why can't I like kind of just do what she's doing and still have that freedom? So it's funny how like we both share that perspective
Yeah.
and like we have these two separate like out of these roads.
And I think that's the dysmorphia, right? Like that's the body dysmorphia. And I was literally joking with you and Alyssa, like, um our gym across the gym posted pictures from a workout, and I literally, like, didn't even my face wasn't shown as much in the picture, and when I was scrolling through, like, I didn't recognize who I was. I saw I was tagged in the post, but I had to, like, go through a few times to see who it was because it was just a shot of, like, my body, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's what I actually look like," where I normally don't connect the 2. It's just interesting how it's, like, so far from reality.
So how was that for you? So twice in your journey of intuitive eating, I went back to macro tracking, right? Once was like maybe 6 months into your intuitive eating, and then I just recently started, well, a couple months ago.
Yeah.
So like, how was that for you having a partner who like went from not tracking to tracking extensively?
So
Because like even when you cook dinner and I'm not home,
yeah.
I still have you still have to like
Yeah.
send me the weights. So
Yeah.
like how was that for you?
The first time it was probably more difficult for me. I don't remember where I was at, like if I was still going to group. I was definitely still in like individual therapy, and I was still talking to Sarah, and I still check in with Sarah pretty frequently. And I remember it coming up, and like the advice I'm given and the advice I try to remind myself is just like I need to stay in my own lane. And we are on different journeys and we're at different points within that, and different things work for different people. And I think as a clinician, it helped me be more open-minded because it truly is like macros didn't work for me. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work for everybody. It just didn't work for me. The second time, there was like that moment of like, oh, okay, maybe I should jump on the bandwagon. But I think I'll always have that with like the next fad diet with these things. Like it's going to be that little voice that's like, do it. But it doesn't mean, it's just how strong it is. I think it was stronger the first time. The weighing stuff doesn't really like bother me for how much I end up cooking. You end up cooking more than me. But it's just, yeah, like reminding myself to stay in my own lane. And for me, I was miserable tracking macros, and I really look back at that and think of how unhappy I was and how obsessive my thought process was. And it's not worth it for me to go back to that. And I feel like I hit the point with intuitive eating. I'm in a good routine. Like I feel pretty neutral about my body. I have like good days and bad days. I think our wedding brought a lot of things up, especially around the second time too. Like that guilt of, not shredding for the wedding came up. And it's like me continuing to push that voice and just like really focus on myself, what makes me happy.
It's funny that you brought up so it's last year I got all like my it was wedding season. I got my suits altered to me,
Hmm.
and then now it's like wedding season again, and I'm trying these suits on, and like none of the suits fit me, right? And like logically, it's because I got stronger.
Yeah.
My arms got stronger, my chest got stronger, and but like mentally, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my god, I gained a ton of weight. So then like I go to the tailor, and even the tailor is like, you can't, you have to stop working out. Like, she's like, don't get stronger, like, stop working. And it's just like, it's like, what do I do? It's this constant, like, battle. Like,
Yeah.
I want to be an exercise. I want to continue to eat how I want. But now, like, these clothes are changing on me.
Yeah. And I think, we have this, it's such a common thing, but we really truly, it's a trigger, and also clothes are meant to fit us. We're not meant to fit clothes. But I know, like with the suits and stuff, like these are expensive clothes, and I know for a wedding, like you had to buy like another pair of pants,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, once again, not a bad thing. Like your legs are strong and muscular, but this is also a financial strain where it is annoying to like constantly go out and buy new wardrobes and to have these things. And I think, yeah, with weight gain for you, I think it's primarily muscle, but your brain automatically is like, weight gain equals bad.
Body dysmorphia is like, fat.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When everybody comes up to you in the gym and is like, oh my God, you're super fit. Like, how do I look like how can I look like you?
Yeah.
But then, we go home, we're like, shame, we hate how we truly look.
Yeah, it's like last night we went out to we got Indian food, we just a crumble cookie.
Yeah.
And I was like, got some brushing my teeth with my shirt on tonight. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like because I couldn't like see that.
Yeah.
Even though like my body didn't change that.
No,
It's
and
fine.
and we say
Yeah.
things to each other. Like I tell you, even after we have those like larger meals
Hmm.
and high like caloric meals, I'm like, you literally still have a six pack, and you were like, oh, I was just saying to myself how fat I look
Yeah.
great.
How Shrekish I was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the perception to ourselves versus what's actually reality. But I think too, the thing with macros and like compulsive exercise, and exercise is still a huge thing for me and something I really had to work on. It was the same thing with CrossFit and you doing CrossFit, and something once again like we used to do together, and us just having different goals with that. And for me, it was going to this CrossFit gym every day and seeing these people who were truly pushing themselves to their limit in good and bad ways. I think it depends on the case of like, whether that's healthy or not. But me comparing myself to them and just that competitiveness and shame once again of like needing to be the best. And then if I didn't attain that or achieve that, like my day was ruined and I felt terrible, and the excuse is always, or the reasoning behind it is because I'm fat, because I gained weight, because I'm doing this intuitive eating now, this is why I suck at doing these things. So for me, I had to pull back, and obviously you didn't. You're still like very active
I
into
went more.
CrossFit. You
Yeah.
went more.
As you pulled back,
Yeah.
I started staying there a lot longer. Yeah.
And you have like larger goals to compete, and I pulled out of like all competitions because for me I think competing is just really triggering and it is unhealthy for me. I still, even this morning, like every Saturday we try and we go do the partner workout.
Hmm.
And I know I'm not where I used to be, but it's also easier for me not to compare myself to everybody else in the gym when I only go once a week. I'm still doing my own thing, but it's not as high intensity. So like I don't feel as bad comparing myself because I can't. I'm comparing myself to people who go like 5, 6 days a week.
Yeah. Meanwhile, on Sunday, I'll go to yoga with you sometimes, and like I can't do anything, and you're like
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
doing everything as
yoga's
yeah.
still very different,
Mm.
but and also like I still go to CrossFit, and sometimes I'm able to do
A lot of the movement.
a lot of the movements, a lot of the weight. Like I said, I still work out and lift and do my own things. Just being by myself allows me to really listen to my body more than pushing myself past my limit.
Mhm.
And I think that's the intuitive part of movement for me is I need to learn how to pull back, and that's what I've been practicing. And you're pushing yourself more, and you love that community, and that really helps you in your mental health.
Yeah, and I think like CrossFit, especially when you look at like body dysmorphia and eating disorders and anything like under that umbrella, I think CrossFit is the best type of exercise for it because it's not based on like
Yeah,
your big box gym where like you see someone doing like ab crunches in the corner and like looking in the mirror every 3 seconds. Like
yeah,
there's no mirrors at CrossFit. It's supposed to be you versus you, but it never really is,
no,
right?
yeah,
But yeah, it's ultimately like that community based of I go in there, I work out into the same
mhm.
guys all the time. And that ability to work towards certain goals and like work towards certain movements, which is really cool.
Yeah. And I think CrossFit specifically is about performance. I still like going to do something different. I like doing something with you. I like that there's no mirrors. When I go to yoga, there's no mirrors. When I work out here, like I have a tiny one, but like it's mostly no mirrors. Like that's really triggering for
The
me.
dogs are mainly in the mirror.
Yeah, the dogs hang out with me. So it's just like knowing my self-awareness and seeing what fits with that. But it's just even at CrossFit and a portion of the people are great. Even like when we went today, like the cash out was core work and it was promoted as like shredding for your summer
For
abs,
summer abs, yeah.
right? And like I sit there and I like huff and roll my eyes because yes, like people do want to look good, and also just that gym culture and like promoting that just is annoying. Like I don't it's just now it's annoying to me.
Yeah.
And I just can see how it can be unhealthy. So, I think just once you have that awareness, it's hard to go back.
Yeah, and I think any statement like that, any statement of like, oh, we need to get ready for summer,
Yeah.
we need to lose is unhealthy, and if you use that in the gym or anywhere else, it's still not appropriate.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people online who debate about this topic because technically with intuitive eating and intuitive movement, your physical image is not meant to be the main motivation. The whole point is like the main question is if your body never changed based on these movements, we should continue to do it. And then that is meant to determine if it's intuitive or not. There's still some things I do, and like that's me being honest that like I probably wouldn't do it if my body wouldn't change. I think that's a plus. I think there's also many factors, like it's good for my mood, my mental health, like it just helps my energy levels. I think it also depends on the type of movement. But I mean, I think it's when it's the only motivator.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I was thinking of like, if your body could stay where it is today for the next 10 years,
Yeah.
would you keep it or would you still want to try to alter it, right? And like thinking about that, yes, I would totally just, yeah, I'll keep my body how it is
Yeah.
now. But yet still I'm like, oh, I need to change my body. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's that like you saying that kind of made me think of it that way. And it's interesting how like when you're proposed that question,
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, of course I want to keep my body right now.
Yeah.
But yet we're still making decisions that try to alter
Yeah.
that.
And I think for me, when I was looking at my relationship with exercise, the answer was no. If my body didn't change, I wouldn't be going to CrossFit 6 days a week, or I wouldn't be staying to do the extra cardio, and I wouldn't be trying to eat macros. I wouldn't be doing all these things because it got to a point for me personally, I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, it became mandatory.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It became once again like compensatory. Like if we were going out to eat or whatever, it's like, oh, I need to stay and like do this extra
I'm
stuff.
there for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Where now it's a lot more lax where I try to keep it balanced.
Yeah, I remember our first summer dating. We were on the beach.
Yeah.
We were going out to
Oh my
dinner.
God. Yeah, I remember.
And it was like 4 o'clock and it was like 3 o'clock and it was so
It was
hot.
like 90 degrees outside.
And we were like, let's go out to dinner. We were like, okay, but I want to go home and run first. I'm like, it's gross. Like, that's not gonna. And we went home and we ran and we
Yeah.
went out to dinner. Yeah.
And I think too, like, it is interesting as our relationship. So when we met, I mean, and we were friends as coworkers for about a year before we started dating. And we would always, talk about similar interests like working out, being foodies, and probably like in it indirectly talking about our disorders. But then when we started dating, we were both very like deep into the disorder.
Yeah, I was not
Yeah, I
agreeing.
think
Yeah.
you were like into your eating disorder.
I was
Yeah,
purging.
you were
Yeah.
purging. I was not in a good like mental state, and I like look back at pictures. I was really like my body composition was just completely different because I was like so strict with everything I ate and did, and I was doing all like this cardio and all these different things. So we were really unhealthy together as we viewed that as, oh, like we just have similar interests.
Yeah. Yeah. Who doesn't like eating chicken and broccoli
Yeah.
every day, all day?
And then, we also do like food.
Mhm.
So we would have these like cheat meals together, and we would work out together, and there's still things that we do together, but I think it's interesting how we both transitioned over the last few years we've been together.
Into like a healthier way. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we still got to eat at least once
Mhm.
a week.
Mhm.
We get some type of dessert at least once a week,
Yeah.
whether it's ice cream or something like that.
You get because we like it.
Yeah, and like we've altered like what we eat at home too. Like we eat burgers at like turkey burgers at home.
Yeah, but we
Yeah,
incorporate more carbs, like more variety. We still work out together a little, not as much.
every Saturday.
Yeah, every Saturday it's still something that we do. And I do think it's obviously good, but it is interesting because I think, we are, even though we're on separate journeys, we're kind of going in the same direction. Because let's say like when I was doing this grouping, you could have been like still like deep into the purging and been like, fuck this, like
Yeah,
absolutely not. And then I'm curious how that would have affected our relationship, and probably not well. But we were like healing together, which I think is pretty cool.
yeah.
And I just don't know like how common that would be or
Well, I think it goes to show like who we are and what we're willing to do for each other, right? Like, am I on this road with you or am I not on this road? Right? And like I could have selfishly been like, nah, like I'm not on this road with you. But like it's about buying in and supporting one another, even if like you don't see how it could benefit you.
and I do think like you said you went to the supervisor at the or the director at that point.
Yeah.
Like you were seeking help,
Oh, I was absolutely yeah,
you know.
before like dude.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I remember I told you I was like 2 months non-purging. We were like in Florida.
Yeah.
And I told you, you were like, "What?" I had no idea. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, like that's what's been going on." And I think like a month after that, you started. It was like right around that time you started going. So we were both like doing stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which I mean was helpful for me to finally have somebody in a relationship who understood what I was going through with the disordered eating, also exercises. And it could be like, we could pressure each other in a bad way or in a good way. So I think it just depends on our willingness to change. I think we
yeah,
were both at the point where we were like, okay, we're in a serious relationship. Why am I like doing all this crazy stuff to change my body? Like it's negatively affecting. Let's try something different.
yeah. You already knew all the skeletons in my closet, right?
Yeah,
And vice versa.
yeah.
Like you know it. You know all the bad about me, right?
And I think that's such a huge thing that comes up, when I talk to clients about the body issues and the fear of like, if I let go of this control and I do gain weight, the main thing is like, what's the fear behind that and why is it? It's normally because no one will love me.
I know.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
undesirable. So a lot of it comes back to like attachment and relationship, so we kind of when we talk about like you say like am I okay with my body for the next 10 years, like why do I need to like have another ab line or why do I need all these things, like who am I trying to impress, like at the end of the day it's for me, but is it really for me?
It's absolute no, it's not,
you
right?
know
Yeah.
so I think we were both just at the point we were more comfortable trying something new.
Yeah, and I think like where we are now, I think we're both flexible and like we are willing to adapt
Yeah.
to where like I track macros, but if one day you're like, hey, like I want to eat this and it makes me go over my macros,
Yeah.
like that's okay. Like I don't have to hit 0, 0, 0 on my macros every day.
Yeah.
Versus like if I'm like, hey, I really want to get ice cream, and like we go to ice cream and you eat like a tiny bit, and you're like, yeah, I wasn't really feeling it, but like I went with you. I think like that allows it to be a lot healthier too.
Hmm.
We're willing to kind of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like a willingness to support each other. And I think the flexibility, because with diets and macros, like there's not much flexibility. It's pretty structured.
Yeah, we're kind of living in the gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I think like the balance is key. Like that's the healthiest piece of this. And that comes back to with the abstinence, right? Like abstinence is very black or white, 0 or 100. And I think the balance and the gray with eating is what's or what can be the healthiest for some people.
Yeah.
So, what would you think has been the, let's say, your biggest struggle with your recovery with your eating disorder, and one of the most beneficial versus the most beneficial?
So what's been the hardest? What's been best?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. I think the hardest would be, I'm going to say two things that have been the hardest. And one of the hardest is somehow going to end up being the best.
Ah, okay.
So I think one of the hardest is going to like social events or like being at work. Like one of the hardest things was when like cleaning services would come to work. Because it's like I had my lunch, but now like even clinicians that I work with are like, why aren't you eating this food? It's like wait, like you're supposed to be a therapist, first of all. Uh so like just stuff like that, or like Thanksgiving and like holidays like that. Um People saying, "Oh, did you gain weight?" Right? Like when it's like, so I think like those have been the hardest. Plus on top, trying to be an athlete while like finding your middle ground of
Yeah.
eating. In turn, that also helps me because I need to eat a certain amount in order for me to perform.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
being around the core group of guys I work out with at the gym are vital to like what I'm doing. Because like they understand where I'm at, and it's just that community of like connection. And I really think that the connection will help with like anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think? You did mention like being a therapist, and what do you think your education, your career, or how has that affected your recovery, or do you think it has at all?
I think it has. I know throughout college, at least once a semester, I've taken like some type of course surrounded by food just to get more insight, which has allowed me to kind of dig deeper into like like this semester I'm taking mindfulness in theory,
Mhm.
how it is focused towards eating.
Right.
So like being able to do that and then also being able to work with people who have disordered eating or substance use and stuff like that, it's allowed me to practice that self-awareness, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's the biggest piece was like practicing what I preach and not being a hypocrite.
Yes.
Where I don't know if I was doing something else, I would have been as accountable with intuitive eating because I'm like promoting this to my clients, and it's always true when it's somebody else, but we're our own worst critic, and I really don't like being a hypocrite.
You've said that a few times in
Yeah.
the past like year or two. I can
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah.
So I feel like whenever I had that inner voice that was telling me, like imposing me to go back to the unhealthy behaviors, I think it's beneficial. One, I understand what my clients are going through. And two, it's like, yeah, I have to take my own advice.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm gonna steal that answer too.
Fair enough. Is there anything that you wanted to add that we haven't gone over?
What is your opinion on men with eating disorders? Like, do you see how they're marginalized? Do what barriers to treatment, since like this is what you essentially specialize in, right? Like, where do you see the barriers of treatment for males with disordered eating, and how do you think that they could break those barriers down?
Yeah, so I mean, one, like, I don't I don't really see many men with eating disorders. Not that they don't have them or that they're not out there. I just don't know if they're seeking treatment. I mean, statistically, the rate of men in therapy are lower than women. So that's already, and then you put eating disorders on top of that, and it like cuts that down even further. So I think one, just like going out and like seeking somebody and asking for help in general. Two, I mean, the shame and wondering whether this is, if like I'm going to out them to somebody, I think like not knowing the client therapist confidentiality and like HIPAA policies potentially. I think there is like, especially, we live in a small town. I work with a lot of people that like know each other and know communities, and like I have like a lot of information, but like I have, I keep that confidential obviously. So I think there's a fear with that, and just knowing like my office is a safe space for that. I think even if they can't, let's say they work with me not being able to understand where they're coming from exactly, but also knowing that I can treat them. And I know we talk about this in substance use a lot. Like a doctor doesn't need to have cancer to be able to treat cancer type of thing. And I obviously like I struggle with disordered eating, compulsive exercise. So I think I have that piece on it. I'm obviously not a man. So I think that I think
But for what it's worth, my therapist who helped me was a female.
yeah, I know. And
Yeah.
I do like, I mean, statistically, men with trauma or men in general normally seek female therapists just because they feel more comfortable. They don't feel as judged or intimidated or whatever it is by a man. So, I mean, like that would probably be for you, like breaking down those barriers as a male clinician, like coming into the profession. But I think they need more of a community, like community was huge for me, or just having that support, even with like the group and with Sarah and talking to other women about this. And, you went to a recent like networking event with me through like the eating disorder professions. And
Yeah.
like we were kind of joking that you're going to be one of the only men. And there were only like a few men there. So I think there just needs more, um, yeah, it needs more attention. It needs to be more outspoken. I think like you going to an OA meeting and there not being any men, even if it's like a men's only meeting, or like specifically encouraging or advertising those spaces for men, I think is really important. Because even if like I were to do an eating disorder group or intuitive eating group, you might have like one man in there or two, and then they feel ostracized or they feel awkward, or that becomes complicated. So I think there's a lot of different factors like systemically that we need to work on. And I think kind of what you were saying, like just talking about it, it's helpful, because then you will realize how many people around you also feel similarly, but are also too scared to say it. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
That's from my mind.
So I wanted to also read some stats before we ended.
Mm-hmm.
But like you brought up that networking event that we went to.
Yeah, yeah.
And can I talk about that?
The gala.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They up in Philly.
Yeah.
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 So like we went to a network event, which was the Association for Disordered Eating or Eating Disorders or something.
Like professionals, yeah.
Yeah. And again, like how my soapbox is how
Oh, because the speaker.
yes. She heard about this. My soapbox is about how men are marginalized with eating disorders and how it's not talked about. And if it's not talked about, it's not going to become a thing that men seek treatment for. And we're at this like association of eating disorders, and the speaker, no fault of the speaker at all, right? Like she's reading the room, but like she talks about it's a room full of clinicians and dietitians and uh what are they called? People who network,
Oh, like marketers.
marketers, and not one thing about men. She
Yeah.
talked about females and LGBTQ, which absolutely like need that support. But again, it's like 40 clinicians and for the Eastern whatever of Philly, and not one thing
Yeah.
talked about a male. Which I'm going to lead into my statistics real quick, just because I did. First things first, the statistics on women, which I found interesting. 60% of women in the military are surveyed that met criteria for eating disorders, and 97.5% of females in the Marine Corps met criteria.
And you're wild.
Um, 1 of every 10 individuals with eating disorders are male. About 1/3 of individuals with bulimia are male. Men are 3 times more likely than women to have binge eating disorder. And men are likely undiagnosed for eating disorders because of assessments and clinicians feeling that they should be building muscle. Those stats are important.
Anything else, stats or not, that you want to add?
Just be mindful. Just be mindful. Like I'm 6.5 years sober. I've really been in kind of like recovery for eating disorder for 2 to 3 years, something like that. And still, if someone is like, "Hey, you look like you gained weight," when like I absolutely didn't, but even if I did,
Yeah.
like that will make me spiral,
Yeah.
right? And like, who are you to tell anyone that they gained weight?
Yeah.
So it's just be mindful. Like, there's this thing where a lot of people feel like they could just kind of say whatever they want to men with like no like people will say things to men that they wouldn't say to women about their bodies, which
Mhm.
isn't okay. So
Yeah.
just be mindful. There are a lot of men who are afraid to be outspoken or talk about like having eating disorders. So just be more mindful of what you say to them and just go from there.
All good tips and feedback. Um, well, thank you for coming on today, and I may force you to come back in the future. We'll have to see.
I'm here for it.
Thanks. And yeah, thanks again for tuning in and listening. Another episode will be released the first of next month, the first of every month moving forward. So, hope you guys stick around. Thank you.